Okay. All right, we ready to go? All righty. Let's continue in our study of Romans then. And Romans 12, could you shut that door over there? Thank you. Someone get it for us? Great. Okay, continuing in our Romans study. We're in chapter 12. We'll be covering verses 11 through 13 tonight on tithing. Thanks for joining us as we continue in our verse-by-verse study of Paul's letter to the Romans. We have been in Romans for 14 months now and have arrived at chapter 12 in verse 11. Let's read it. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. In these verses, Paul states some Christian living basics, perhaps the most fundamental: zeal, service to God, rejoicing because of the hope we have, patience that builds endurance from tribulation, prayer, and giving. In chapters 12 through 15, Paul states many different Christian living principles with a very short commentary on each. Okay, so he'll state a biblical living principle and then just add a little short comment on it. Okay. He states many different Christian living principles, like I said, with a very short commentary on each. Is this the Cliff Notes on a comprehensive catalog of Christian living topics? I suspect it is, for the most part. Maybe not comprehensive, but nearly so. Paul plunges the depths of justification in chapters 1 through 11 and now states the most important principles of Christian living in the rest of the letter, along with a short commentary on each. So the book of Romans primarily focuses on justification, but then in finishing the letter, Paul touches on kind of the cliff notes on the Christian living or sanctification. So 1 through 11 is justification, and then chapter 12 through the rest of the book is sanctification or Christian living. Much of the New Testament canon, especially the Pauline epistles, address these topics in more detail. Our main focus tonight is giving, but I will first touch on some other principles before the latter part of verse 13 there. Paul says to serve the Lord with zeal. You see, the first 11 chapters are the what of justification, which is completely God's work. Chapter 12 following is the how of our work. Our work, that is. Someone might say, oh yes, Paul, our works flow from our understanding of chapters 1 through 11. No, that is not what I'm saying at all, and that is a lie from the pit of hell. Okay? Our sanctification and our Christian living is not powered from justification. It's powered from regeneration. Okay? Or the new birth. The first 11 chapters are a definition of justification. 12 following is instruction concerning worship, which is the same thing as Christian living. As Andy Young so aptly taught in Lesson 8 of our Acts series, assembling together on Sunday or any other day is not worship. Christian living is worship. I once saw a sign above the entry doors of a sanctuary that stated, "Enter here to worship." That's really, really bad theology. Okay? That's the woman at the well theology, right? Jesus corrected in their, it's that theology, woman at the well theology, that Christ corrected in their Sunday school lesson there at the well. Therefore, you would expect worship as Christian living to introduce chapter 12 and following, and that is exactly the case. And Paul said, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. But, someone might say, but Paul, it says, I appeal to you, therefore, which means 12 following is predicated on 1:11. Yes, but in what way? I will tell you. 1:11 defines a finished work of God that cannot be affected in any way by us. It's a settled issue out of our control. Okay? That's the first 11 chapters. Therefore, the transition there, we can zealously pursue righteousness in the Christian life to the degree that 1 through 11 is intrinsic with 12 following. Our zeal must be tempered with caution, for how we interpret 12 following can then reflect on the first 11 chapters. The two must be radically separate. One is a definition of God's finished work, and the other is instruction for work yet to be accomplished by us. You might want to underline that. Okay, I like that if I don't say it so myself. All right, the first 11 chapters are a definition of God's finished work. Okay, the rest of the book of Romans is instruction for work yet to be completed by us. This reality speaks directly to the zeal of our worship, okay, or the actual word there is service in the first verse. This also speaks to the giving issue when we arrive there and the whole consideration of, quote, tithing. The subject of our work versus God's work. This question of dichotomy and difference between the two is in fact a biblical hermeneutic. We can also borrow more understanding on the subject of jealous service in this same chapter, chapter 12. Paul said in verse 2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God. What is good and acceptable and perfect. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function, so we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. And if you shut that other door, the HVAC motor is not as loud out here. Okay? Thank you very much. Thank you. Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, finishing up the verse here, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches in his teaching, the one who exhorts in his exhortation, the one who contributes in generosity, the one who leads with zeal, the one who does acts of mercy with cheerfulness. If our thinking is conformed to the world, will that hinder our zealous service? Absolutely. As we experience discernment and growth, will that provoke zeal, provoke a zealous spirit in us? Certainly. Will we be hindered if we are unaware that we have a spiritual gift specifically designed for a particular function in the Christian body? Absolutely. So all of these elements spoken of in the first part of this chapter speak to serving God zealously. Perhaps these are some of the things Paul had in mind when he instructed the downtrodden Timothy to stir up the gift within you. That's in Timothy 1:6. It is not uncommon to see commands to master our emotions in the Bible. Feelings are an extremely important element of life quality, and we are given hope that there is a way to experience a happy life and service to God. A most important principle follows. Right feelings follow right doing. We command our feelings by what we think and do. And I have the references there, Genesis 4:6 and 7, and Philippians 4:9. If Paul commands us to serve zealously, or to serve God with zeal, we have to go to the rest of the Bible and look in depth there, okay, to find out how to do that, okay. For the most part, rejoice and hope speaks for itself, but I will add that that an ambiguous definition of our eternal future will dampen hope. Okay, we will have more rejoicing in a hope that is well defined versus some ambiguous idea of eternity in heaven. All right. What does patience and tribulation mean? Again, chapter 12 following is an extensive list of topics in regard to Christian living, and further research is assumed. Okay? James wrote of how tribulation can be used to strengthen our resolve and endurance in the Christian life. Many important facts about trials can be found in the first chapter of James's letter to the 12 tribes. Then we have constant in prayer. All right? We can be constant in prayer because prayer has many applications to the Christian life. I'm only going to address one because we're only touching on these three before we get to where we really want to go. The part of prayer that I'll touch on is in regard to worry. Worry should always be replaced with prayer. This would pertain to things that are out of our control. All right, so worry will destroy you. Okay, when Christ said, I believe there was a little bit more behind to what Christ said when he said, "Who can add a year to their life through worry?" I don't know what you would call it, but I think there was a subtle underlying truth there as well, that worry will actually subtract from your life. Okay? Therefore, if there is something you can do, rectify the cause for the worry, do so. That's key to worry. Okay, what are you worried about? Well, I'm worried about da-da-da-da-da. Is there something you can do about it? Yeah, well, if you do something about it, there's nothing more to worry about, right? Right, okay. And I think, we laugh, but I think we forget that, okay? I think we get focused on the worry and then actually don't stop to think, okay, problem solving, and get into a problem solving mode. All right? So, if nothing can be done, put off worry and put on prayer. That's Philippians 4:6 and 1 Peter 5:7. This is one of the put-offs and put-on, and I think an important one. But there's many other things about prayer we could discuss. In Christian circles, prayer often replaces action because Christians don't know what to do. That's a major problem, and I think Christianity tonight, when I used to do, or in our day, when I used to do a lot of counseling, one of the favorite questions you would ask them for their presentation problem, why are you here to talk to us? And, when you would ask if they had tried to do anything about the problem, they would often say, well, I've prayed about it. Okay? So, a lot of times it takes more than that. All right, so this brings us to the target of our message tonight. Okay, and that part of the verse is contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. This is where we really want to be tonight. This is the target. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Conspicuously missing in this long list of Paul's Christian living principles and under the nomenclature of monetary giving specifically is a word that saturates the Protestant psyche, the tithe. Okay? The word means a tenth, the idea that Christians should give a tenth of their income on the gross, of course, even though Christ clearly said the tax belongs to Caesar, right? This is a gargantuan normality in the Christian church, the whole idea of the tithe. All right. Yet, where is the word here among these other major concepts of Christian living? In chapter 12, and where is it in the rest of the New Testament? The word tithe, I say here it appears twice, yes, in the singular. The word tithe appears twice, and you see it there in Matthew 23:23 and Luke 11:42. Okay? We won't read those, but those are the two places, you can read the references there yourself, where the tithe is mentioned. The word tithes, plural, appears as follows, once in Luke, and then all of the other remaining references to either a tenth in regard to the tithe, or in the plural or singular form, all other references appear in Romans chapter 7.
Hebrews.
Okay?
Hebrews.
So, huh?
Hebrews.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, thanks for that correction. Hebrews chapter 7. So, we have three references in the Gospels, and then all of the other references to the tithe in any way, shape, or form are all in this one chapter in the book of Hebrews. Very curious, okay? Like the verse we are looking at tonight, the tithe never appears as a New Testament imperative among multitudes of passages that contain instructions on giving, such as the following. Now here's my point. In chapter 12 following, now that we're into sanctification, we have this long laundry list of sanctification categories with these little pithy sayings along with them, okay? And almost all of them are imperative. And I didn't go through and count them, but there's several, okay? And they're all imperative. Most of them, all of them are imperative. Where's the tithe? It's very curious that it's not in there. Now, okay, so I'm saying here the tithe doesn't appear, but my point I think here is when you get into giving rather than tithe, when you get into the topic of giving, it's everywhere. And I have several references listed there. And, there was a worry tonight about the number of pages, but the reason the manuscript is so long is really because I've just listed all of these references here, and by no means are we going to read them all. You can read them yourself. But besides the fact that need seems to be the standard for New Testament giving, I would like to direct our attention to Matthew 6:1. Okay? We have the tithe spoken of a mere 3 times in the gospel, and in context that is, and in a context, by the way, that is non-specific to giving. So the tithe is mentioned, but it's not specific to how you tithe or anything. It's mentioned as a subtopic, so to speak, of something more central Christ is talking about, like hypocrisy. Okay? The rest of the references we have the tithe spoken of a mere 3 times in the Gospels, and in context it is non-specific giving. The rest of the references are in Hebrews 7, as I mentioned, and again, giving is not the specific subject there either, by the way. Okay? But note Matthew 6:1. Like the rest of the New Testament, righteous giving refers to giving that meets needs. All right? And this is just reality from someone who has been an evangelical for a long time. The tithe is very difficult to execute in secret. Now I'm talking about this. We probably, how long of a verse is that reference to Matthew 6:1? Let's read that, because that's what I'm talking about. Matthew 6:1. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received the reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Okay? So, when we get into discussing the tithe, it's hard for it to be a secret thing, and therefore done righteously. Okay? In fact, in some evangelical churches, they will bring you up on church discipline if you don't give 10%. Actually, this has become pretty prevalent in the church today, and especially in the New Calvinist tsunami. When you join a church, you sign a covenant, and in some of these churches, a statement of your income is required. Okay? I was at a pastor's conference and ended up in a debate over the cash in the plate tithing. All right? the argument I got from a fairly well-known pastor in this area was that the cash in the plate tithing was for those who didn't want to be, quote, accountable, okay, to the church leaders, okay? Well, if we go back to Christ's principle in Matthew 6:1, we're really not talking about giving in secret here, and we're talking about giving to be, quote, accountable and to stay out of trouble with the elders, all right? That's not secret giving. And listen here, we have all seen it, the politics of big tithing in the church. Few pastors will back down from a big tither on any issue. The tithe in and of itself has created a huge culture of politics in the church. It really has, along with all these other traditions, like the Lord's table, and all of the debate that comes out of the Lord's table. Should you use grapefruit juice? Should you use, real wine? Okay. I was in Baptist circles, independent missionary Baptist churches. Many of those churches split over that issue, the issue of grape juice or wine. Okay. Can members outside of the church take communion? I was a member of an independent missionary Baptist church where I wasn't there at this particular service, but there was a wrestling match over the plate, okay, of bread, because a deacon was trying to pull it away from a visitor who wanted to take communion, and the policy of that church is that you couldn't. Listen, the Lord's table was an informal look in the New Testament church, much like we plan on doing here at the Potter's House in the future. People came after work. Okay, they had a fellowship meal. They came in. They immediately fellowshipped over dinner. Okay, either at the end of that dinner or after the lesson, they would drink of the cup, okay, and if you want to make sure that's grapefruit juice or wine, whatever, I guess you would have it on the table. They would drink of the cup and eat bread. Christ said, "Do this in remembrance of me," really a remembrance of his second coming, okay? Christ said, "I will not drink of this cup or eat of this bread till I do it again with you in the kingdom," okay? But it was very informal. It was very informal, okay? And then they would have some kind of Bible lesson, and then at the end, they would sing a hymn together and either depart or maybe stand around and talking. But the departure was the singing of a hymn, okay? That's how it was, very informal, all right? So what do we have in the institutional church with the Lord's table? This very solemn, ceremony, okay? It wasn't like that at all. And my point is the Lord's table, the tithe, all of these other things, what tradition has done to those things there's just multiple examples. So, last week I made a request to those who visit my blog for some good information, or a good information source on tithe giving. As you know, I usually don't do that and prefer my own personal study, but the subject of giving is a pretty massive subject that would have set me really back in this series at least a couple of weeks. Well, I think I hit the jackpot I was referred, this guy, I really appreciate it, referred me to Pastor Gary Arnold's book, published in 2009. As you can see there, the title is Tithing Today, a 19th Century Blunder. All right. before I get into some things that are learned from the book, I want to quote an objection to not tithing cited in his book, and here it is. Some will say, if tithing ended, how is the Christian church supposed to be financed? That topic will be covered, he says, later in the book, and that's on page 21. He then later states in the book on page 38, these principles apply not only to giving to a church, but for giving in general. Since tithing ended at the cross, the Christian church must be supported entirely by free will gifts. All right? We find in the scriptures guidelines for this giving. All right? This is where I'm going to just pull the cat out of the bag and confess where I have landed on all of this. And this study on tithing has pretty much closed the deal for me. I believe the New Testament model of home fellowships was not a temporary model. I believe it was meant to be permanent till the Lord returns. I don't think there is any institutional church to support with a tithe. I believe Christians meet in homes and give their money according to need. Okay? A tithe to support a brick and mortar church institution is undoubtedly the biggest scam ever perpetrated on mankind. I know that's strong, but after 3 years of research on these issues for full time now, going on 4 years, and almost 7 total, that's just where I stand on it. Churches teach tithing because institutions are cash-hungry beasts. Let me repeat that. Churches teach tithing because institutions are cash-hungry beasts. Okay? As far as the whole institutional church infrastructure and academic caste system, I just don't see it in the Bible. All right? So why do we give money to it? How much of our tithe goes to institutional infrastructure? Okay? Do we want to know? I don't know that I want to know. Okay? This study is just one more example of the many things we have learned in the past year that will never be learned in the institutional church or at seminaries. Okay, my point here is that I read this guy's book, and what is learned in this guy's book, you're just not going to get in seminary. Okay, the whole system is controlled by the traditions of men and what is expedient for the institution. Before we get into the finer detail of Pastor Arnold's book, let me state our position by launching off of the aforementioned quotation. Quote, the Christian church must be supported entirely by free will gifts. We agree, okay, we agree according to the church expressed in local home fellowships, not the institutional church. Giving should be free will and based on need, okay? And the church or the home where you're meeting in a group, hey, there may be a little bit of need there, all right? But trust me, man, look, okay, really, can you do church any less in somebody's home than you can do in a big building? You say, well, you can only fit so many people in somebody's house. Well, then meet in other houses, all right? A lot of these big mega churches do that anyway to incorporate the, quote, small group into their, the corporate church. But the belief is that without the corporate church, it wouldn't be complete. I contend that when they meet in those small groups, they're not doing church any less than they are when. They all meet in these separate groups. What can they not do in those homes that they can do in the big church building? See, none of this makes sense, except when you get into the institutional construct and all of the control issues and caste issues. That's really what the institutional church is about when it gets right down to it, and that's why the tithe is taught, because it's a temple tax that's needed to run these churches with these huge infrastructures. Okay, now churches that don't require a tithe and are mega churches and do quite well in their financings, that's a whole nother issue. But remember, they teach the more you give, the more you get. So it's not just a 10% tax, it's unlimited money, obviously. Look at some of these places. So Arnold seems, however, to base his argument on the abrogation of Old Testament law that pertains to the tithe. And let's look at this quote. He says, and I really should put the page number in there, but a quotation, I'll add the page number in there to the manuscript. He says, this shows that the written code, the law, was canceled. In verse 16, this is repeated by, do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or a Sabbath day. Verse 17, and I'll get to the scripture that he's talking about. He's talking about Colossians 2, 16 and 17, I think, or 17, 16 and 17. I have it again later on, okay, so I'll address it there. But he's talking about Colossians 2, 16 and 17, okay, and what he is saying here is verse 17, he says, explains that these laws were a shadow of the things that were to come, again showing that the laws were done away with. The word shadow was translated from the Greek skia, which means darkness or air. We would only part ways with Arnold here because the text doesn't say things that were to come, but rather things to come. Okay? We often translate the whole idea that the Old Testament, this whole idea that the Old Testament was shadows of the coming of Christ and the New Testament thing, and the New Testament completes the Old Testament. No. Okay? That verse doesn't say they were shadows of the things to come, or I'm sorry, the way he worded that, again showing, he says, that the laws were done away with, all right? The laws were a shadow of the things that were to come. So when Christ came, the laws were done away with, tithing in particular. No. Now, I haven't studied this in depth, but I think the chances are pretty good that when the millennial kingdom comes, the tithe will return. All right? Because the Levites will probably be back, and they're the ones who got the tithe. All right? Now, so my argument here is look at that verse closely. It doesn't say that. It says things to come. Now, why is this? The Old Testament is yet future in pertaining to Israel for the most part. As we have discussed previously, Old Testament's covenants as well as the New Covenant build on the foundation of the promise and culminate into the new heavens and culminate at the new heavens and new earth. Okay? Now, there's many reasons we say this. The new covenant, Jeremiah 31, was made to Israel. And if you read that whole chapter, a lot of the new covenant that Jeremiah explains there, or that God is talking about, Jeremiah 31, is clearly not accomplished yet. The new covenant is not yet fully consummated. All right? So the new covenant expression that we have now is only part of it. All right? It consummates with Israel. Listen, so what I'm saying here is what we say, the promise. That is a biblical term you see a lot in the New Testament and the Old Testament. The promise. Okay? Will culminate with the new heavens and new earth. Peter says that. Peter says we're not looking for the rapture. Peter says in this time that we're in now, call it the church age if you want. Church is a term that I'm kind of trying to get out of my terminology. The assembly age, the assembly of Christ age, more specifically. Peter says we're not looking for the rapture per se. We're not looking for the millennial kingdom per se. We're looking for the new heavens and the new earth. Why? Because that's when the promise is consummated. Okay? Some of the covenants are passing away. A lot of people preach those passages in Hebrew, and another one in 1 Corinthians, I believe, as, the shadows of the Old Testament have passed away. No. Read those passages carefully. They're in the process of passing away or fading away. Okay? But they're not abrogated. They're not abrogated. They're in the process of passing away, but they aren't abrogated. Read the passages carefully. This is the way we look at covenants and eschatology. Here at the Potter's House, we do not hold to covenant theology, new covenant theology, or dispensationalism, but rather remnant theology. This statement can be obtained for free by emailing us your snail mail address, and this is what we will send you for free. And it's so exciting to know what you believe and why. Okay? I was so excited when we had this printed up. We know what we believe, okay, and why. Remnant theology. With that said, okay, the last part of this message will summarize Pastor Arnold's excellent points on what the tithe was in the Old Testament. And I wholeheartedly recommend that you download his book at tithingtoday.com or newtestamentgiving.com. Our one disagreement is noted, and I'm going to summarize some of the important ideas that I have been challenged to consider from this book. Arnold's presentation of these ideas in the book are very in-depth, by the way. It's a very in-depth presentation. All right. One, Western culture has made the word tithe a religious term. In the Bible, it simply means tenth or a tenth part. It's strictly a mathematical term and has no religious connotations to it. Two, the contemporary teachings on the tithe make no distinction between assets and income. Arnold argues that the Old Testament tithe was based on assets and not income. Okay? Wow, if that's true, that blows away the whole concept that tithing is predicated on. 10% of your gross income. He says no. Hence, that would be very contradictory to the contemporary approach that calls for at least a 10% tithe on gross income. By the way, I've talked with pastors across the board. It's on gross. Where would they get that? Okay? What would that even be based on? Okay? Um, Here's the answer I like. Pastor, should I tithe on my net or my gross? Well, if you even have to ask that, something's wrong with your heart. I love that one. Okay? You only ask the question because you want an excuse not to tithe more. Okay? I don't think it's a hard issue. I think since we're doing it wrong to begin with, what's the right way to do it less wrongly? Or something like that, right? Anyway, I got a chuckle at that one. But of course, if you even ask, there's something wrong with your heart. They all say, well, it's on gross. I've had, an argument with a teacher at a pastor's conference on this. I ask you, what, and this is telling to me, the fact that it would be your gross, what scripture would substantiate that? You can't. You could make a case for net because Christ said, render to Caesar what Caesar's. All right? Well, my gross isn't all mine. Technically, the government owns X percentage of it. Okay? So, if I tithe on net, most Americans are in a 30% tax bracket. Okay? So it's like, technically, the government owns, I work up till April, and that all belongs to the government. That's their money. That's not even my money. And then that gets taken out, and I tithe 10% on that. My point being is, where do they get this stuff? Okay? Other than they would rather you tithe on your gross rather than your net, because that's more money. Now, Arnold also agrees that that this idea is congruent with when Old Testament believers were supposed to tithe. Now, I don't have time to go through and study all this, but apparently if you look at what the tithe is and when it was done, it was done at certain times in the harvest because they were tithing on assets rather than income. He breaks all of that out and shows the difference. Okay? The book really obliterates all arguments that use Abraham's tithe and Joseph's vow as an argument for New Testament tithing. Okay? The book, number 3, the book makes a distinction between man's work and God's work. This was really good. This subject is ever so important in our day. A man plows, plants, and water, but God gives the increase. Okay? Now, if you're a farmer, are crops going to grow if you don't go out and plow and plant in our day?